Welcome to the BEASTwriter Family, where social media engagement is encouraged. I am your host, Ryan Sakamoto, and today we have the honor and privilege of having former NFL GM and 2000 GM / Executive of the Year, Randy Mueller, on the show. Randy, thank you for tuning into the show. Mahalo, and thank you for joining us on this Wednesday or hump day. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Good to be with you. Always good to talk football, even if it's the middle of June, you know?
Yeah, I know it's downtime right now, but you put up a tweet. Let's just start there. You put up a tweet in regards to this is kind of like the anxiety era for the NFL GM because, again, it's the off season. Well, as you prepare for training camp, obviously, but there's a lot of unknowns, right? Fear of the unknown can happen, especially with all these players that are coming in. You don't want that phone call where, hey, this guy's in jail for having reckless driving, or he was drunk and got in a bar fight, or whatever the case may be, because ultimately the PR is going to have to clean that up. As a GM, what do you tell the team before they head out and do their own thing?
Well, I think most fans, if you want to compare it to the last day of school, right? And the kids are running out of the building for summer vacation, like they just can't wait to get to the swimming pool. They can't wait to do what they do. Well, right. These guys are very similar. They're adults, but they've been grinding all spring. They're looking to get away and have some fun themselves. So, the coach usually gives a impassioned plea to act accordingly, right? We don't want to have to clean up any messes. We don't want to get anybody hurt. And least of all, we don't want anything bad to happen to you guys. And so sometimes that speech works. Other times it falls on deaf ears. And it's a time where probably over the next month or so, as a GM, you're always kind of waiting for something bad to happen. It's a bad place for your mind. I've been a recipient of a few of those calls over the years, and whether a guy got hurt in a basketball game or wrecked his car or something happened even out of his control, right? It just things find their way to professional athletes, no matter the sport. And this seems to me like when it happens a lot is these 30 days prior to camp when everybody's trying to get away.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I can vouch for that. You talk about basketball. I played with a lot of the Niners. Some of them weren't supposed to, but right. We would play, you know how that goes, right? You're not supposed to do it, but yet they do it. I played with them. Some players did get hurt. We didn't say anything. You would never know because we would be healed up in that 14-day time span. So it does happen. Players get sprained ankles, sprained fingers. As long as it's nothing like a torn ACL or anything like that, odds are they'll be okay, and you'll never know about it. Because it's like don't ask, don't tell. I don't see anything, but you can tell them all you want. But at the end of the day, it's up to the players whether or not they're going to want to take that step and listen to what you have to say. Because a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, that's cool, but it's never going to happen to me, until it does happen to them, and they're like, oh crap, maybe I shouldn't have done that. But yeah, good point, Randy. Let's go ahead and talk about some of the things that you had going on. With the Seattle Seahawks, you were the vice president of player personnel. You obviously worked your way up from the ground up. From 1990 to 1999, you held a very respectable, highly respected position. Talk about your first round pick and who that favorite player was during your time span there.
Oh boy, we were lucky. We had a few good first round picks. We had a good staff, a good scouting staff, and we were in rebuild mode a few of those years. So we had some top 10 picks. Probably my most favorite is obviously the Walter Jones, John Springs draft, when we started the offseason, I believe, with 11 and 12 in the first round and turned him into 3 and 6 and ended up getting really 2 Pro Bowl players, 1 Hall of Fame player who some think is the best lineman to ever play in the league. So that was probably my favorite. But gosh, we had some good drafts. We drafted a guy, Pete Kendall, who played a long time in the league, an offensive lineman from Boston College, Joey Galloway, who most people know of, a receiver from Ohio State who was really a good NFL player. Those were some of our first-round picks. Anthony Simmons, an inside linebacker from Clemson that played many years in the league. So we hit on more than we missed on, that's for sure. It was a good run of drafting players for the Seahawks during the 90s.
So who was your favorite?
Well, I'm going to say Walter Jones because he was the best of them all, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to cop out a little bit. Yeah, Walt was the epitome of a pro. This is a guy that had only 1 year under his belt at Florida State, had transferred there as a JC player, played 1 season, and became the 6th pick in the draft. So he came a long ways. He got a lot better after we got him. I credit our coaches for that, for developing him, and really unbridled talent when we got him. But he became a pro, he became a man, and is still a pillar in the Seattle community to this day.
Yeah, Walter Jones. I had Andre Carter on the show, a good friend of mine, and I asked him who was the toughest player he went up against. He said Walter Jones. So there you have it.
There's a lot of people that can answer that one the same way.
Yeah, Walter Jones was an absolute monster. If you don't know who Walter Jones is, go back and watch some of these throwback films. He would just literally isolate that same side of the field, and he did it consistently. Now, we talk about that all the time. What's the most important trait that you look for in a blindside left tackle?
Well, obviously, he's got to have great feet, right? He's got to be an athlete. And if you can find a guy that can dance like a bear at 330 pounds, there's a good chance he's going to be your left tackle, right? I was lucky. I got a chance to have Walter for a few years. Then I had Willie Rofe in New Orleans, 2 Hall of Fame left tackles. And so I've seen the way it should be done. And I think the hardest thing is you got to find the combination between an athlete who can move laterally, but yet has anchor and strength to sink his butt and hold his space versus bull rushes. That's the magic to the position, is being athletic enough, but yet having what we call enough sand in your butt to sit down and hold your ground against big, strong men trying to push the pocket with a bull rush. So those guys could both do that.
You talk about fundamentals, all right? For people who don't know, the underlying message that you just spoke about was fundamentals. Are you a waist bender or a knee bender? A lot of times these scouts, they look at a waist bender and say, hey, look, I can convert this guy. I can coach this guy up into a knee bender. But a lot of times it's already trying to be coached up at the college level. You took a player, all right, moving away from the offensive line. Let's stay on the offensive side of the ball. Let's talk about the running back position. You drafted a guy by the name of Chris Warren, who is one of the most underrated running backs in NFL history. Right. He was a Division III product, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. What did you see in Chris Warren that maybe other scouts didn't see when drafting a player like Chris Warren? How do you convert a D3 school kid to the NFL level?
Well, he's a great example of just what you're talking about. In this particular case, Chris Warren was a man playing with boys at Ferrum College. I remember the film of him running in the open field, and it's like neighbor kids jumping on their back of their dad, right? And their dad's running, and there's guys hanging on their shoulders and hanging on his legs. But the tip-off for us that allowed us to kind of project him to the next level was he was freshman of the year in the ACC at Virginia before transferring to Ferrum. So we saw him against big-time players. We saw him against men, so to speak. So we knew he could do it at at our level because he had done it in ACC, talent. So we got a little sneak preview of that freshman year before he moved on from Virginia to Ferrum. But he was easy to scout just because of he had all the natural skills, and what people failed to see until you stand next to him is he's 6'2.5", 232 pounds. This is a big man. So can you imagine that at Ferrum College? Like I say, and neighbor kids are trying to tackle him, right? And it was unfair. It was comical at times.
Chris Warren, didn't he wear number 42? First of all, it's an unorthodox number. And I, as a kid growing up, I watched him. I was like, man, who is this guy? I was like, Chris Warren. And I did some research as a kid. Obviously, the internet wasn't there yet. So you'd have to read the Pro Football Weekly and magazines like that to kind of field some analysis on him, the kid. And the guy was a beast. I mean, he was really fun to watch. And I remember one time, I think he played the 49ers or he played some NFC team. And he was just single-handedly won that game for you guys. I have to go back and watch the film on that game and see who that opponent was. But that's where I really found some love from Chris Warren. The guy was an absolute monster, one of the most underrated players, like I said, in the NFL. Staying on the lower division side, obviously players that don't come out of the FBS. Let's hit on another prospect that you hit on. I mean, I'm giving you some love here. You drafted Michael Sinclair. This guy is another underrated talent that you found. Was it Division II kid, right? If I'm not mistaken, Division II kid. How important, is building the lines on both sides of the football when drafting a player like a guy like Michael Sinclair? And again, like I said, the move paid off getting a D2 kid. What did you see in Sinclair's game that other NFL teams undervalued? Was it get off? Was it technique? Was it work ethic? What was it?
I'll tell you what it was at the time, because I remember seeing the college film on him. And so much of the time, Ryan, it's about fit for that front seven on defense. It's
Right.
about them fitting with the scheme you run. And so he was a little bit of a tweener, right? He was a little light, so he played some linebacker. He put his hand on the ground and rushed some in nickel. But when you see his frame, you say, that guy could be 270 pounds.
Yeah.
I want to say he was like 240-ish when we drafted him. But I kind of forecasted him to at some point be a full-time defensive end, right? He just had the frame that you knew he could add weight. When we used to say, when this kid gets 3 hots in a cot, he's going to gain weight, Yeah. And that's really what happened to Mike, is he grew into his body once we got him. So you could see some tools, but at the time we played a 4-man front in Seattle, and he was fit for them as like a 7 technique defensive end. So he was on the edge a lot of the time. And really it was about fit. And he became a really good defensive lineman because of that. He just fit it from a size standpoint and from his skill set standpoint. The best thing he did, like you said, was rush the passer. But he didn't do it with necessarily speed and athleticism. He did it with technique and contorting his body and leverage and all the things that should translate to the next level. And it worked in that case.
Yeah. Great insight. Great insight. You talk about technique. You talk about leverage. These are things that I think every good football player has. I mean, you can get by pure athleticism, but at the NFL level, everyone's good. Everyone good. And no longer can you play that college game where I can outrush this guy. I can speed rush this guy, because again, when you're going up against guys like Walter Jones, going against guys like Orlando Pace, these types of players, you're not going to be a factor. You're not going to make any type of impact, because they're not going to be fooled by any of those speed rush moves. They know how to isolate you, and they can actually use your speed against them. So, you hit on the nail. Michael Sinclair, again, another one of my favorite players. That's why I had to bring him up. You touched based on Sean Springs. This is, again, I was a Niner fan growing up, but I remember playing Madden. I actually traded for Sean Springs on the 49ers. Sean Springs was my favorite cornerback growing up. He was drafted, number 3 overall out of The Ohio State University, if I'm not mistaken. His dad played for the Dallas Cowboys. Is that correct?
Yeah, running back, number 3.
Right. So I'm doing this off the top of my head, to be honest with you. He had the speed. I thought he was, I thought he had Hall of Fame in his bloodlines. Obviously, I thought he was going to be a Hall of Fame type of a player. He was a great player for you guys. Talk about what you saw in Sean Springs' game that really warranted to be a first-round selection inside the top 5, because as you know, top 5 is usually not garnered for boundary cornerbacks.
Yeah, I think in his case, we saw him, and this term gets thrown around, a shutdown corner. That's what you're looking for.
Okay.
Well, there's not many of those in the world, trust me. There may be 4 or 5 of them in the NFL at any given time, so they're not easy to find. But in Sean's case, we saw somebody that didn't really have any weakness. He didn't have any Achilles heel to his game. You're talking about 6 foot tall, 200 pounds, so he had size, he had strength. His knack was really playing the ball. He was very instinctive. You could tell, because he was wired this way. His dad, like you said, played for the Cowboys. He'd been around the game his whole life. Sometimes when we get players at the NFL level, you wonder, did this kid ever play as a kid? Did he ever play Nerf ball out in the yard and play with the neighbor kids and pick up teams? That's really when you develop instincts for the game, right? That's where you get the intricate details that you just learn as a kid, and then they become second nature. Well, Sean had that. Sean had the ability to make something happen when it didn't go as the coach draws up on the whiteboard. He could still sort it out, and in a timely fashion. So he just had instincts. He had high football IQ. And the other thing about Sean is he had a great work ethic and desire to win. And we knew what we were getting every day with him. The best thing about his senior year at Ohio State, the consistency that he played with Saturday, he just kept stacking up really good games, and may not have been the flashiest guy in the world. We're not talking about Deion Sanders, but we knew exactly what we were getting. And he checked all the boxes. That was the best thing about it. Versatility, smart, instinctive, all the size, all the instincts, but boxes. Really just a good player for us. And the key to it was we had a giant need that year at corner. So we needed to draft a corner. And anytime, if you do what I've done for a living my whole life, it's about drafting players and taking the best players, but the best draft picks are getting the best players at the biggest position in need. And that's why it worked out good for us in Seattle.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, I had high hopes for Sean Springs. I thought he was going to be, I was like, this guy's going to be a Hall of Famer. And I still like him.
He made a couple Pro Bowls.
Oh, he did have a couple. He had 7 interceptions that one year. And man, I'll never. And then he had five. He had actually a lot of interceptions over the course of his career. Now that I think about it, Sean Springs, again, one of my favorite players growing up, and he did have a really, really good NFL career. You talk about true shutdown cornerbacks, right? You talk about the critical factors, especially at the boundary cornerback position. What is the most important skill set that you look for in a boundary cornerback? Because I talked to some scouts, and I'm not going to name those scouts, but they said from their higher ups, if the guy can't make a play on the ball, as in get an interception, they will wipe him off their board completely. Do you disagree or agree with that assessment?
I agree from the standpoint of this. Not necessarily does he have to make interceptions, but he does have to be able to locate and play the ball. I think that's a fatal flaw. If you can't play the ball as a defender, you see guys that are in great position time after time, but they never make a play on the ball. That's a fatal flaw, in my opinion. You can be close every down, but if you can't ever figure out a way to get your hand in there or to make a play on the ball, it's a fatal flaw. So I do agree with that part of it. I think there are ways to overcome that, and I have seen players get better at that. So I don't think because you come into the league as a non-reactor to playing the ball, you can't get better at it. So I think it's a trait, though, that like the scouts you talked about is very, very important.
Yeah, I think one player that comes to mind with the 49ers is Carlos Rogers. He would always be in position. He would make plays on the ball, but he wouldn't turn them into INTs. It wasn't until like Harbaugh came in and Ed Donatel really put that and shaped that up. I was watching practice, and the guy's just absolute attention to detail when it comes to making plays on the ball. Yeah, great point. This is awesome to have you on. And again, thank you so much for doing this. We're going to continue on. We have a question here from a viewer. He says, a guy called Ed from the BEASTwriter Family says, question for Mr. Mueller. Who was that one player that got away during your time as GM?
Well, I always go back to my time in Seattle because I was there 20 years, right? And we drafted a center in the second round one year that ended up being a really good player for a long time for us. He became a free agent the first chance he could and slid out of town and into New York on us, and we never saw him again, and that was Kevin Mwai, who became a Hall of Fame offensive lineman out of LSU. That's one I always regret. I had a chance to re-sign him when I went to Miami as the GM. Nick Saban was our coach at the time. Ended up losing out in that battle to Tennessee, and that's where he finished his career when Tennessee signed him. So had a couple swings and misses at Kevin Mwai. Was lucky enough to be with him the first 4 years of his career. But I often say he was a really great player, but he was also at a position that I think needs to be your leader, needs to be your communicator, needs to be the glue behind your offense. So it was a double loss in my opinion when he left Seattle, and then later for me when I couldn't get him to come to Miami. Really good guy, good leader, like I say, good player. Gives your quarterback a lot of confidence because he's the guy calling the protections. Got to be on the same page with him. Kevin Mwai was probably the one I regret most getting away.
Yeah, Kevin Mwai was an absolute baller. I remember watching him as well growing up. And the guy is he's very smart. I mean, I know from the center position, you have to be smart, but I mean, I not interview offensive line. I think offensive linemen outside of the quarterback are the smartest. No offense to any other position, but they're the smartest players on the football field. Very, very, what's the word? They're just very, very bright in how they handle everything and how they perceve everything and how they dissect it.
They have to process the information fast as well. And so that's the missing ingredient. You're right.
Right. Kevin Mwai was just a beast. Okay, that was a great question. Bob Williams says, how come the Seahawks are always better than us, as in the 49ers? Do you have an answer for that? You can step off that one if you don't want to answer that one.
Well, they've had Russell Wilson for a few years, so that's an easy answer the last 6 or 8 years, that's for sure. But I'll say this, the 49ers have given them good games, and it's a great rivalry. The people in Seattle fear the 49ers as much as anybody, probably even more so than the Rams. And those rivalries get people riled up in Seattle, I know that. So don't think that the Seahawks don't have respect for the 49ers, because they definitely do.
Yeah, it was a lot. The Niners kind of went to after Harbaugh left, and then I had Seahawks fans who followed me here in the BEASTwriter Family, and they're like, it's not even fun anymore. The rivalry used to be fun, but it's not even a rivalry anymore. Literally, they would be like, oh, man, like, how am I supposed to respond to this? Like, yeah, you're right, bro. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Yeah, we suck. Like, what do you want me to say? And then Shanahan came in and kind of turned ship along with John Lynch. Let's talk about the 2000 New Orleans Saints. That was your first year as the team's GM. Ultimately, You were then named Executive of the Year, GM of the Year. Talk about the cultural identity, because you turned around a 3-13 laughing stock, which, if correct me if I'm wrong, has never won a playoff game, right? Up until that point.
Had not won a playoff game, yes.
So you made history. Tell us about changing that cultural dynamic of that locker room, of that management, of that scouting department on all three levels. And how hard was it to do that in one single season?
Well, the league was set up at the time, and I think it still is, so that you can get better in a hurry. I always thought when I went to New Orleans, everybody said, "You're crazy. Why would you go to New Orleans? You know, they're wearing bags over their heads. Fans don't, you know, blah, blah, blah." And I told the people when I got there, I said, this is not to sound disrespectful at all. I don't really care about the past. I don't care what you've done in the past or not done in the past. I have no say in that. All I can tell you is what we're going to do going forward, and here's what we're going to do. We changed about 30 guys on the roster the first year. We hired a new coach, Jim Haslett, who was young and hungry like myself. We kind of set our whole rest of our life, which is sad to say. So this included families and everybody aside for several months while we got set up and got things rolling there. And we hit the ground running in free agency. I think we signed 8 guys the first 48 hours of free agency. So we kind of set out to change the culture fast. We hired really all new people. The one thing New Orleans had was, and you mentioned it, they had a good offensive and defensive line. We were able to keep most of the guys that they had, really good players, and add some skilled players, add some guys that fit our schemes at linebacker, in the secondary, at receiver. You know, we signed Joe Horn the first year. We signed a big defensive lineman, Norman Hand, who was a franchise player in San Diego at the time. So we added a few pieces there. And then it's one thing to have a team on paper. It's another thing where your coaching staff can bring them together. And we had a ton of injuries that year. I went back and looked at not too long ago. We had, Ricky Williams was there. It was his second year. He was injured halfway through the year. We picked guys up off the street that were running for 100 yards a game, and guys like Terry Allen, a longtime journeyman veteran in the NFL. And so we had a lot of guys step up that year. So we had some good karma, that's for sure.
If I'm not mistaken, I think Terry Allen I was reading the Mercury News, and this is off the top of my head. You mentioned Terry Allen, and it kind of flashback for me. Wasn't he also rumored to be going to the San Francisco 49ers back in 2000, if I'm not mistaken? Because I think Charlie Garner was there, but then Garrison Hurst was coming off an injury. So I think Terry Allen was actually rumored to be also in the ring in San Francisco.
It could be. And back in those days, San Francisco was in our league, right? It was
you had NFC West.
LA and St. Louis, those were our teams, and Tampa. So those were the teams we had to compete against.
Yep. I do remember that. For those who don't know, the Saints were in the NFC West. I wish you guys were still in the NFC West. I don't know. I wish you guys were still in the NFC West. Carolina Panthers, I wish you guys were in the NFC West still. Falcons, I wish you guys were still in the NFC West. It was just fun. I liked it, because I would go to the games and, you see the players on the other teams, and you have to see them at least one time. And it's like, you look for those other players and you're watching like, wow, we get to see Sam Mills today, or wow, we get to see Andre Rison today, or Deion Sanders, or, whatever the player is on the opposite, Willie Roaf, right? Because we get the sheet. Oh, Ricky Jackson, it's like, wow, we get to see these players. And I just remember, watching those players and being just in awe, because how many times can we look at, a certain division and have so many good players within that own division? It was just amazing. All right, so let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about the 2021 NFL draft class. You obviously stay on top of this stuff. Who were your safe bets and can't miss prospects?
Well, I think the safe bets have been talked about a lot. You're talking about the kid Atlanta picked, the receiver from Florida. He was probably as sure shot as I've seen. Let me look here. I've got a list of them all right here somewhere.
Making you work today, Randy.
Yeah, you are. I wasn't expecting to talk about the draft, so I apologize. I'm scrambling here.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
For some reason, I can't remember his name, but Atlanta made no bones about picking him.
Kyle Pitts.
Kyle Pitts. Yep. I've been asked many times who's most likely to wear that yellow jacket out of this year's draft, and at that point it was easy for me. I think Kyle Pitts is a little bit of a transcendent player because he's not only a tight end, he's a receiver, he's a slot player, he's a little bit of everything. So I also think you're talking about a draft with Trevor Lawrence and Zach Wilson, two guys that are going to be starting quarterbacks in the NFL as rookies, as having a chance to be really good too. So I mean, it's easy to say, hey, the first 3 picks were there. They're good players. But this was a draft that was weird, right? Because we had the pandemic. We didn't have great evaluations on a lot of guys. I think everybody's draft board differed. You might find the 4th player on one team's draft board listed as the 18th player on another team's draft board, just because everybody gathered information differently in these pandemic times. We're limited on pro days, on attending pro days. So it was kind of a mixed bag. This draft will be great to look at 10 years from now to see what the pandemic did to drafting players for NFL teams in 2021.
Yeah, it was really tough. I mean, I think pre-draft visits is a huge part of that process, because a lot of times what people don't understand is during the evaluation process, during the scouting processes, you know what they can do on the field, but you want to see what makes them tick. You want to see what doesn't make them tick. You want to see how they fit, like as you said earlier, the cultural fit and the dynamic of that locker room. Is this kid going to be a problem for us, or is he blowing smoke, or is he actually being genuine when he's interviewing? Is he being coached up to being asked these questions? Can we decipher exactly what exactly are we getting with this? Because at the end of the day, once he signs that contract, we are tied for the next 3, 4, 5 years. Yeah. These are things that I think not too many people want to go and talk about, because at the end of the day, again, the evaluation process of having a guy just come in, people think, oh, they're really interested in him. No, it's just maybe to get more legwork on that player. Or a lot of times what they'll do, or what, I don't know, I can't talk in your case, but I've seen it and I know what happens, is they'll bring in other players just to get a reference on the players who they're actually targeting. Case in point, there's a few players that, I don't know, like let's say Chase Winovich, right? He goes and then he gets interviewed by the Pittsburgh Steelers during the pre-draft process, and they were really high on Chase Winovich, but I'm pretty sure they also asked about Devin Bush at the same time, right? So, I mean, you kind of field different informations and pieces of information in order to round out exactly how you're going to stack up your draft board. So, yeah, great point on that. This is awesome information. This is like really, really good stuff. And people think it, again, thank you for doing this. It's really amazing. Let's go ahead and move on. We're going to talk about other questions, obviously. NFL draft stories, all right? We're going to talk about the war room. If we were sitting in the war room and we talk about, you know, certain scouts within that process, and if I was in the 5th round and I was really scouting this hidden gem from Ferrum University, and I'm like, Randy, I really believe in this kid. And you'd be like, well, I'm the GM. And then be like, okay, well, Chris tells me one thing too. Like he agrees with me. How do you guys decipher? Do you guys have some kind of a point system in every single round where one voice is not greater than the other? But how do you come to an agreement when I know for a fact you guys argue, like it's or debate, I should say. You guys discuss things, which is good. You need to have a healthy debate, healthy discussion. How hard is it for you as a GM to kind of separate the two and be like, okay, back off. Where should we go with this player because we're on the clock?
Well, I think it's a great process itself that everybody should get to sit through the whole process, right? And when I say process, I'm talking about from January to April, because that's really when it unfolds. People would be shocked as if they knew how little discussion happens on draft day, but it's all been done and discussed ad nauseum. Those scraps or those arguments or those disagreements, they all happen in February and March. So those are put to bed way before draft day. But I think, and I only know the way I did it as a decision maker and as the guy in charge in a lot of cases, I wanted a consensus. I wanted opinions from my scouts. I didn't want yes guys. I didn't want necessarily young, inexperienced guys just to gather information. I want evaluations. And then I want to talk about how we fit those evaluations in with our schemes, because that's really what it's about. It may not be about finding the 5 best players. It's finding the 5 best for us. Yeah. So that we have a criteria at each position that we have to fill before they even get to our draft board. And the priority of those 5 criteria determine how high up the board they go. So I always say, let's say, Ryan, you have a 5-0 on a player and I have a 8-0 on a player. Okay. For all intent purposes, the truth probably for me is somewhere in the middle. It's just about how much in the middle we go. I'm not for averaging grades. I don't think it comes dead in the middle every time. But I also think that as the decision maker, you have to evaluate the evaluators. You have to know your own people, whether it's coaches, scouts. You have to know whose strengths and weaknesses come into play when they're talking about certain positions. So you have to gather the information, having spent time with these guys year in and year out. hey, I've got a scout that's really good with these corners. He really knows what he's talking about.
Yeah.
I've got an offensive line coach that really is not a good evaluator, doesn't really care about it, doesn't really spend time on it. And I'm just giving you examples. You've got to know who these evaluators are.
Right.
And so when you come to position them on the draft board, it's our grade. It's not any one person's grade. So it's a matter of coming to some common ground, setting up your draft board per se like that, and then not using your needs to elevate grades and players. Just because we have a giant need for a defensive back doesn't mean we're going to take a guy in the 4th round and move him up into the 2nd round because we have a need. That's how you make positions. That's how you make mistakes, filling needs at positions. That's why I've always been one to draft the best available player, if at all possible, within reason.
We would work well together because I'm a firm believer in that. And I said it since day one, and people in the BEASTwriter family know that. I say anytime you reach for need, you diminish the value of the pick. So what's the point of making that pick if you diminish the value of that pick by reaching for need? Because ultimately, when you do that, you're going to be out of a job in 2-3 years' time, if not that year. So the best bet is, even if it was a player at a strength and it's the best player available, you still take that player, because at the end of the day, there's still unknowns. You just make a strength a bigger strength, right? So I agree with you on 110%. Frank DeBoss, thank you so much for the super sticker and super chat. If you want to support the work here in the BEASTwriter family, consider sending me a super chat. Thank you so much, Frank DeBoss. All right, so we have a question from JT Conlon. He says, was that Kevin Costner movie Draft Day have any truth to it? I always talk about that, and I tell them, I said, being in the NFL media, talking to NFL GMs, talking to scouts, there's a lot of Hollywood in there. Can you talk? But there is some common truths. Can you just talk about that? And I think that what they really want to go with is, the Callahan quarterback situation.
Yeah. Here's the shame of this whole conversation. And I hope people don't start throwing apples and tomatoes at their computer screen. I have not seen the movie. I've never watched it. I've had no desire to watch it. It's just, I've lived it long enough. I just haven't found an interest in diving into it. And I probably need to, just out of love for the sport and for historical value. I should watch it, but I have not seen it. So I'm the worst person to ask about Draft Day. I've had this come up in other interviews and other people have talked to me about it, and I always have to cop out, but I've never seen it. So I don't know really even the crux of it all.
No, you're not missing much. I mean, I like the movie Draft Day, but
a lot of people like it. Yeah.
No, I like the movie Draft Day because, again, I think there's some parallels as to truth versus Hollywood. And I always tell, there's some common truth there about work ethic, and you can find the underlying silver lining within these certain messages that Kevin Costner does and how, the draft unfolds. But like you said, a lot of the legwork has already been done leading up to the draft. Let's talk about the power struggle. All right. The power struggle within the dynamic of an NFL head coach versus a GM. A lot of times the GM will select the head coach, but in like the 49ers situation, the Carolina Panthers situation, the head coach was already there and he was part of the hiring process of the GM. Talk about the power struggle, because I seen it when I worked with the 49ers with Trent Baalke and Jim Harbaugh. It's no secret. It was a very toxic working environment. Talk about the power struggle and how do you decipher the two? Like, how do you kind of come to grips and kind of work as one when you have two alpha males in that same room?
I always think and I get asked this a lot, I always think it's more about the people than the structure. In my 30 years in the league, I've worked under coaches, I've worked equal with coaches, and I've been the coach's boss. In each team, each situation, the relationship's always been the same. I just feel like two heads are better than one. If we don't agree, we're better picking a different lane. I just think our personalities, we don't have to have the same personality, but we do have to have respect for each other. And that's all I've ever strived for. I've never had a power struggle with a coach in any way. I mean, like I said, I've hired coaches. Nick Saban hired me when we were in Miami. So I've worked under him, but I never really had an issue with any of it because I always felt like as long as we could say and communicate anything we wanted to each other, the club would benefit from that. And like I said, two heads are better than one. So I've never been a part of it. And I know it's destroyed places. You mentioned the 49ers. I've heard the horror stories about that. That's crazy. It's amazing to me that people can't set their own agenda and egos aside for the good of the team. This happened in San Diego before I got there. If you remember Marty Schottenheimer and AJ Smith,
that's right.
I think 14-2, and the coach got fired. I mean, are you kidding me? You know how hard it is to go 14-2? That's crazy, but they have struggles, and it's really personality based. It's all kinds of issues. And again, I don't think the organization, I've always put the organization, the loyalty to that team and the organization first, and whatever it has to be to make that good for the club. That's what I always sold. That's what I bought, Yeah. So I've never been a part of anything designed or structured where the structure kept us from moving forward.
Yeah, that's what made you such a great GM, is because, again, I think you're more of a people person and you see things from both sides, and you know when to pull back. I mean, you can have a power trip because you're the GM. You can be, hey, Ryan, F you, man, you're out of here. You could say that literally, but I think you're the type of guy, hey, Ryan, let's sit down. Let's talk what's going on. Let's see how we can kind of ride the ship in the right direction so we're all on the same page, because communication is key.
Decisions that get made that are forced on one or the other person always come back to bite you. Trust me, they just do. You're never going to be able to force a player or a decision on a coach, nor should the coach force that on you either. So I just think common ground is the way to go. And I always used to tell our coaches, Dennis Erickson and myself have been together a couple times, Jim Haslett, even Mike Holmgren, who I was with in Seattle. If we couldn't agree, we picked a different lane. We were just better off because of it.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, I think it's good to be different. I think it's good to have these discussions, but at the end of the day, you have to respect each other's opinions, because at the end of the day, if you don't respect somebody, that's where it gets toxic. And I felt like in San Francisco, no one respected anyone. Like, I'd be literally walking. I was one of the first ones there all the time. Okay. So I go in the media, go in my office, go in the media workroom. That's where, all of us are Matt Mayoko, all of us, Matt Barrows. And I'd be one of the first ones there. I'd get my workout and go to the office, and you could just feel the vibe. You could just feel the tension. I mean, you can see Harbaugh walk passing through. You can see Balky. And I was just like, it would just set me off in a bad mood, because I'm like, gosh, really another day of this? Like, you understand what I'm saying, Randy, right?
Yeah,
so it's just
I get it. You feel it. You feel it all day long. You feel it. And it's a bad feeling. It nobody wants to be a part of.
There you go. It was mentally draining. It was mentally draining more than anything. I'm not even the one in there. I'm just reporting it and have to report it because it's part of my job. Let's talk about the front office hierarchy, right? You have the GM, you have the vice president of player personnel. For the most part, you have the director of college scouting, then you have the regional scouts, and then the national scouting, then Blesto, and so forth. Can you talk about the hierarchy, and how does one move up from, let's say, an intern to a regional scout to a director of college scouting? Like, what steps need to take place in order for you to get and hold that title?
Well, you've said it, and there are a lot of different stepping stones along the way to becoming a GM. I never really had the goal in mind that I wanted to be a GM in the NFL. What I had as my goal was, I want to do my job as good as I can and make the people in front of me look good. And if you keep doing that, and maybe that was old school 30 years ago, but I kind of kept moving up the food chain because that's the way I operated. I never had my own agenda per se in the middle of anything. And I think that's what nowadays really is the unnerving part of front office structures, is there's a lot of agendas at work. And it might be as simple as the money has changed people, right? The money is so crazy right now at all levels that everybody becomes desperate. Everybody becomes one that all I want to do is save my own job. All I want to do is take care of myself. And I didn't come up during those times. So I'm aware of it now. I know people, the game has changed. The personalities have changed. The people have changed in the hierarchy in front offices now, to where they are definitely looking out for themselves more than ever before. I always came from the standpoint of, let's just do our job as good as we can. If we win enough games here, and Chuck Knox told me this years ago, whatever you want in life, whether it's credibility, whether it's pats on the back, whether it's more money, whatever you want, satisfaction, if you win enough, you're going to get it.
Yeah.
So winning supplied everything to everybody. And now you see a lot of people trying to shortcut that system. But I think unless you have success as a team, it's hard to promote, so to speak, from within.
Yeah, that's some great advice and great insight there. Because at the end of the day, I think, again, it comes down to communication. Also, the agendas. People have agendas and people have big egos. Okay, I'm just going to say out there, there's some people who I know, they have big egos. And if you don't give them love, saying, because I'm responsible for making that pick,
Yep.
then they get bent out of shape. And it's just like, dude, we're a team here. Like, it was a team effort. Yeah, but I found him first. I'm the one that told us to go out there to send, such and such out there to go check out that prospect when he wasn't even supposed to be there in that region. He had to drive 150 miles this way. And that was my pick. That was my guy. Why is he getting that happens? And it's just like, bro, calm down, dude. Like, what's going on here? Like, geez Louise. Let's talk about it. Aspiring scouting advice. All right. There's a lot of people here who are very interested in becoming an NFL scout. I always talk about networking, reaching, people are more likely to extend that helping hand if you're able to reach out to them and have the guts to do it. What's some aspiring scouting advice do you have for someone who wants to be an NFL scout one day?
Well, I think a couple things. First of all, you've got to perfect the trait that you're looking to accomplish, right? Whether if you want to be an evaluator, you have to perfect that somehow, some way. So you have to have access to film, and you have to perfect the way that you describe players, characteristics. You have to understand what you're looking for on film, for one thing, identify it, and then you've got to find a way to put it on paper so that people can understand it, and be consistent throughout. You've got to consistently describe what you see on film. Really, that's what scouts do, describe the player. And you have to do it over and over and over again. The other thing you got to do, and this, again, sounds sad, but you've got to be willing to put some of your life aside, right? We talked about it a little bit before the show, and this carried on to me even until a year and a half ago when I ended my career with the Chargers. I was spending 200 nights a year on the road. 200 nights out amongst them, fighting the battles, gathering information, doing all the evaluations. You've got to be willing to do that. And you've got to have connections at schools that can give you the intangible information that you can't get on film. So you've got to be willing to do that, have credibility with certain people. And then the other thing is you've just got to find an opportunity, right? So the opportunity, maybe you want to be a scout, but the opportunity is as an intern in the PR department, so to speak. You've got to find a way to get that opportunity just to get in the door. So don't turn your nose up at any opportunity just because it's not exactly what you want to do. The hardest thing is to get in within the four walls of that building somehow, some way. You'll find a way to maneuver to get to where you want to get within the building, but you have no chance if you can't get in the door. So whether it's as a volunteer, an intern, anything you do, don't be worried about job description. Don't be worried about pay. Just get inside the door. So that's what I always tell kids nowadays is the opportunity's there. You got to find a way to connect with somebody to get that crack open so you can squeeze through it.
Yeah. I'll be one of your scouts when you become a GM again. How's that?
Okay.
All right. Randy Mueller, you have a football advising company called the Randy Mueller Football Advising, and it's on MuellerFootball.com. Can you talk about that? Because I think you already just did, but talk about exactly what that is, what services you provide, and what your company provides.
Really, I've always wanted to have a little advising company during all my time. And it was till a year and a half ago when I left the NFL that I said, I'm just going to offer up my opinions, my views from the GM's chair, whether it's with evaluations, whether it's for coaches as a sounding board one way or another. And really, that's all I've been able to do is offer my side of 35 years in the business so people can have something to bounce it off of, right? I also write a blog on there at MuellerFootball.com where I write weekly columns based on how I see things from the NFL GM chair. I put one up today based on some of the time we just talked about with all the things going wrong this 30 days before training camp and what that can feel like for a GM. So my topics are a little different. They're more calendar related as to the NFL and what a GM might be viewing. And that stuff has been really, I've used it throughout my career. So I do think it's benefit from that. And I've been used and lucky enough to be a sounding board. I also do a podcast on The Athletic with Mike Sando, their national writer. So I do a weekly podcast for them. We've done it since last summer. Hopefully we just did our last one last week, take a little hiatus here before the NFL season, but I've enjoyed the podcasting part because let's face it, and once you're in the football business, I become a film junkie, right? All I do is watch film. When I'm bored, I come in and watch tape. I have access to NFL and college tape, so I spend a lot of time watching film. So it's easy for me to stay in the game when you're doing that, and the podcast allows that to happen.
Yeah, I think that's the age of information. College, I do the same exact thing. When it's off season, well, I do it during the season. I do it year round, but especially like right now, like this is a time where I really fine tune the studying because I have my own grading system. I don't rely on PFF. But like you said, like when you scout a player, right, you have to be consistent. So if you're consistently right in something, seeing something, or consistently wrong, at least it's consistent. But when scouting certain positions, right, when it comes to the cornerback position, it's a lot different than, at safety, for example, right? A boundary quarterback as opposed to a safety who can, and nowadays has to be interchangeable. And in years past, let's talk about that. Do you believe that when evaluating a safety, no longer can you just be a box safety based on the NFL rules today?
100%. You can't hide guys that can't cover anymore. You used to be able to do that, but now formations, coaches are too good. They'll find you if you can't run and cover. They find linebackers now that can't run and cover. Therefore, they have to come off the field. And that's why teams are really in sub packages 75% of the time now. It's based on matchups that coaches have been able to exploit. So, yes, I think that's why you see a guy like Buda Baker getting the kind of money he gets. Guys at the top of their game at safety now are demanding and getting big money because in regular personnel packages, they can go cover a receiver in the slot. There's not many of them that can do that. Even a guy in Seattle like Jamal Adams struggles with that. So a safety that's athletic enough to cover in the slot, because you're going to get matched up at times with bad personnel in the game, depending on what an offense has done to you in substitution packages, right? Those safeties become valuable. And so you cannot hide guys that can't cover anymore. But the ones that can run and cover, Simmons in Denver, like I say, Buda Baker in Arizona, those guys that's why they're getting 15, 16 million a year.
Yeah, that's a great point. And again, offensive coordinators are smarter now. They can create mismatches based on window shopping, pre-snap, putting one guy lined up on the other side. And now it's like, oh, that's the strength of the formation. Right. And we got that safety. We know he can't cover. Like a Jamal Adams. No offense to Jamal Adams, but he's more of a traditional box safety, more of a blitzing, more of an extra defender and run support. I agree with you there. I look at a guy like Tyrann Mathieu, right? Tyrann Mathieu can play the slot. They interchange. He can be listed as a free safety or a strong safety, but he can do both. Like Buda Baker, I think that's as a scout, that's what you look for, because again, like what you just said is the game has changed so much where you can't just have like a Steve Atwater on the back end. You can't just have a guy like Tim McDonald on the back end. Like the game has changed. Cam Chancellor, right? On the back end. You need to have that safety who has the range to cover. Now, let's talk about Richard Sherman. Okay, Richard Sherman was a boundary cornerback. There's people who view him as converting to safety. Now, what people don't understand is now, he may be smart enough in his pre-snap splits, but does he have the range to cover the deep thirds, the deep halves of the football field, or often as a single high safety? Because again, you don't have the sideline as an extra defender. Do you think he can translate seamlessly, like a Charles Woodson, from cornerback to safety?
I think it's going to be hard. I really do. I think, and I have a lot of respect for Richard Sherman. What he's done, there's nobody can say, hey, he hasn't done it on the field. I think the one thing probably lacking with that for him is safeties have to have some physicality to them. Rod Woodson, Ronnie Lott, those guys that went from corner to safety were still really good tacklers, really physical in the box. I don't know if Richard's willing to do that at this stage of his career. Maybe he will. But if he's going to stay at corner, he's got to find the right scheme, right? He's got to find that Seattle scheme where length changes angles of balls coming into players. He's got to be able to use that to his advantage. He's not going to be able to lock up and run with people man-to-man anymore. So it's more about fit in his case. I just don't know if he's going to be that. He does have the ball hawking, hand and ball skills to play safety. I just don't know if I see him. The other thing that he did good when he was at the top of his game was he anticipated. He would gamble at times. I don't know many of us that want to anticipate and become a gambling safety at this point in his career. So that's a little bit of a wild card there as well. You want a sure tackler. I want to know my last line of defense is going to be there at the end of the day. And that may be a struggle for Richard as well.
I said the same exact thing that you said. I said, Richard Sherman is not, no offense to Richard Sherman, but he doesn't have the speed to cover a deeper range. Like, you have to cover more range. And like you said, more importantly, you have to be a physical tackler. A lot of times you're known as the eraser role. You're the last line of defense. So once that running back hits that second level and now is off to the third level, not only do you have to stop him and be physical, but you have to understand how to take a proper angle to the ball carrier, because at the end of the day, the team is counting on you. Otherwise, it's going for 6. These are things that I think that are very important. And I'm glad you pointed out, because everyone was saying, oh, no, Richard Sherman can convert to safety. I was like, no, I don't think so. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you're wrong. But at the end of the day, I just don't think he has the range or the physical ability to kind of mirror the athleticism like a Charles Woodson had, like a Rod Woodson had, like some of these players like Ronnie Lott, right? So it's a different ball game, and especially in today's NFL where, you have to be able to tackle. At the end of the day, I mean, Deion Sanders, would he be a good free safety? Yes, but would he be a good strong safety? Coming up in run support? Probably not. He doesn't like to tackle. He admits it. He doesn't like to tackle. Why do I need to tackle? I just get my hand on the ball. So, yeah, thank you so much for pointing that out. This is awesome. Okay, I have another question for you. Best player available versus need. All right, we talked about this. At what point when you stack up your board do you say, okay, if you're sitting there at 13, we can make a trade to 18? And we talk about cluster of players these days. I don't know why people say cluster of players. And I understand you group certain players on your board, but in that cluster, there might be one of those cluster of players who is ranked a little bit higher within that cluster or that tier. At what point do you have to sacrifice saying, hey, should we get this guy or should we just take one of those players in that cluster?
Yeah, I think really what it comes down to is the volume of players in those clusters. I would never trade out of a particular cluster of 4 or 5 guys if I'm taking a step down in player value, right? That's one thing that doesn't make any sense to me. So I think we said it. I've always been a best player available guy. I think what happens if you start getting too far away from that is, and this may answer your question in later rounds, if I'm in the 4th round and we're looking to fill out our depth chart first and foremost, we're probably going to have to pick a player that's maybe rated the bottom of the 3rd round and bypass on some carbs that are in round 2. So you end up with a team of backup players that you filled out your depth chart. Looks nice, right, on paper. And there are GMs and there are places in the NFL that do that. They start drafting to fill out that depth chart right when we sit down. And to me, it's crazy. There's no way I can do that. I produce a team of a bunch of backups, but we have depth. We have bad depth. Let's find good players. We'll find a way to fit them in. And chances are we're going to need and use those guys because someone's going to get hurt anyway. So let's take that safety in the 2nd round, even though we're in round 4, and we need a linebacker even more. That also goes with the fact that I used to use free agency to set the table for the draft. So we would sign some younger ascending players in free agency so that we didn't have to draft for need. So there's a couple ways around that. One is to stick within the cluster, and 2 is to set up your draft with a decent signing or 2 in free agency that allow you to maneuver in that draft board and not have to draft a certain position of need.
Right. Let's just go back in time through your draft picks from 1990 to 1999. Cortez Kennedy, Hall of Famer. Chris Warren, we talked about him, beast. Michael Sinclair, talked about him. He was another beast. Michael Bates, great special teams player. I liked him coming out. You guys got him in 1992 in the 6th round. Michael McCrary, another one who had some good years as an edge rusher as well in 1993. You drafted Sam Adams, Kevin Mawai, Joey Galloway, Christian Fourier, who not too many people talked about. He was the tight end for you guys. I watched him. I loved him. I think he was one of the most underrated players during his time there. You guys got other guys like Walter Jones, Sean Springs, Amon Green in the 3rd round. You guys hit on a lot of running backs, it seems like. Sean Alexander in 2000. But a lot of guys that you hit on, a lot of guys, especially on the defensive line and running backs, you seem to have a knack for that. So I think when you talk about, certain players, especially at certain positions like you talked about earlier, you have a track record of it's not just one position. It's like multiple positions. And you did a really good job at that. All right, we're going to wrap this up with Randy Mueller with the BEASTwriter 2-minute drill. You guys know what it is. I'm going to ask you a series of questions, this or that. You just tell me the first thing that comes to your mind and why. You ready to go?
Yep.
All right, this is Randy Mueller. Getting to know Randy Mueller in the BEASTwriter 2-minute drill. Tacos or burgers?
I'm a burger guy.
Are you?
Yep, burgers. I'm throwing caution to the wind here. We're just picking it based on what I want, right?
Yes, absolutely. Right. Lobster tail or crab?
I'm a crab guy. I like crab. I'm a West Coast guy.
Yeah, you are. You are. All right, dogs or cats?
I'm a dog guy. Love dogs. I've had one my whole life. Never been a cat person for whatever reason.
Yeah, me too. I'm not a cat person either. To all you cat lovers, no offense. Yeah. Pancakes or waffles?
I'm a waffle guy. I like waffles. Nice. I think it comes from my childhood, my mother used to cook us waffles for dinner. So we had breakfast for dinner. So I've always been a waffles guy.
All right. So you never saw the movie Draft Day, but there's a common theme there with pancakes. So if so, you gotta.
Maybe that's it. Maybe I don't like pancakes.
Yeah. All right. Netflix or Disney Plus?
Oh, I'm Netflix all the way. Disney passed me by. I'm too old for that.
Dude, there's some good stuff on Disney Plus, though. I'm telling you.
Yeah.
All right. Apple or Android?
I am Apple. I've got all Apple stuff.
All right. Fair enough. All right. Calvin Johnson or Julio Jones?
I'm Calvin Johnson. I'm old school. I think he was an uncoverable player. Put it that way.
Wow. Okay. So you talk about him being uncoverable. You talked about Kyle Pitts earlier. I see more Kyle Pitts used as a wide receiver than a tight end inline blocker type, so to speak.
No doubt.
Do you think that Kyle Pitts has the same uncoverable ability that Calvin Johnson had?
I do. I think it's a fair comparison. Yeah. I had Megatron written in my notes several times when I was evaluating Pitts. The thing that Pitts people don't understand is he's 6'5", he's 230 pounds. So guess what? If you do cover him, you can't do anything about it. He's going to outreach you and catch the ball anyway. So that's why I say I don't know if he's coverable. See,
I'd be a good scout for you because we think alike. You see how this goes?
I like it.
All right. Tom Brady or Joe Montana?
That's a hard one. I think Tom Brady. I'm going to have Tom Brady. And I love Joe Montana, but I think Tom Brady's the greatest.
I said Tom Brady too. So, my fans are like, I'm like, no, I think it's Tom Brady. All right. Starbucks or Pete's?
Starburst or what?
Starbucks or Pete's? Starbucks coffee or Pete's?
I'm a Seattle guy. I can't. They'll take my Seattle card if I don't say Starbucks. But
I know.
I don't like to experiment with my coffee, so I know exactly what I'm getting every time I go to Starbucks. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I just keep going to Starbucks.
Very, very true. I'm a Pete's guy, but I like Starbucks too. I can't go wrong with Starbucks. All right. Well, that pretty much wraps it up here in the BEASTwriter Family 2-minute drill, getting to know my man, Randy Mueller, former NFL GM and 2000 Executive of the Year. Randy, thank you so much for tuning into our show and coming on. And again, we wouldn't be here without guests like you on our show. And for you to go ahead and take your time out of your schedule to do it, we really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it anytime, Ryan.
All right, Randy, take it easy and have a good day. All right.
Thank you.
All right. Mahalo. All right. That was Randy Mueller. That was great. That's all I got to say. That was great. You guys had a lot of questions in here. What's up, G says Trey Lance came from a conference that doesn't have the talent of like the SEC. How does a team evaluate and compare a player from a lesser conference to a stronger conference? What's up, G? We answered that question earlier on the live stream, not in regards to Trey Lance, but converting a D2 or a D3 player like a Chris Warren or like a Michael Sinclair and projecting at the NFL level. We spoke about that earlier. I don't know if you caught it. You probably did catch it. But yeah, I should have asked that Trey Lance question. Gosh, blew my mind. I can ask him afterwards. It's all good. All right. So that pretty much wraps it up. We're going to go ahead and open up the line. Let's go ahead and do so right here. If you guys want to go ahead and tune into the BEASTwriter Family Show, you guys can go ahead and do that. I'll just put it up on the ticker here. And we are off and running. So I'll be on for the next, 10, 12 minutes, 10, 15 minutes or so. Why 12? Why 10, 12 minutes? That's so exact. 10, 15 minutes or so before hitting the gym. And I will be here answering your questions if you have any. So again, ticker's on the bottom. Just open that up in the new web browser and you'll be able to call in to this live show. All right. Any comments that we have going in here? We have Jets Gang in here and Tommy Huxley going after Jets Gang. Be nice to Jets Gang. And be nice to Tommy. Play nice, guys. Play nice. Yeah, that was really good insight from, again, Randy Mueller. I really liked talking to him. He provided great insight on what it was like, not just being a GM, but then holding the dynamic of the hierarchy from the top down. A lot of times we look at the GM and they get all the love, but at the end of the day, it comes down and it's a collective team effort. You know, the director of college scouting, the national scouts, the Blesto scouts, the interns, right? So you really have to talk about that. The vice president of player personnel, obviously they get love too. The assistant GMs, you guys get the picture, as opposed to the titles that we all can trend on Google search engines and find who those people are. But at the end of the day, it's a collective effort. And I liked how he dissected it down and saying, you know what, one voice is not greater than the other. We do all the legwork, you know, from January to March or April, right before the draft, and we come to an agreement on setting up our board. And that way there is no guesswork involved. It's set in stone, pretty much set in stone. And we will make our decision based on the collective agreement of all our scouts. And we have trust in our scouts, and that's why we have scouts in the first place. And so we're going to use them. I really liked what he had to say. Jets Gang says, I hate Brady, but he's the best, though. Yeah, he is. He really is the best. He really is the best. I cannot argue with that. And again, Tommy Huxley says, Montana is better than Brady. I would say Brady's better than Montana. But, you know, that's not to say Montana isn't second best. Now people are like, unsubscribe from BEASTwriter because he's a hater. No, that's just my opinion. Like, who's to say? I mean, it's a great debate, right? It's a great discussion to have. So, yeah. All right. Jets Gang says, so what does it say about 49 safeties? They're not even in top 10, top 20 Jet safeties ranking 5. So you're talking about Marcus May, I presume. If I'm not mistaken, you're talking about Marcus May. I think you're talking about Marcus May, top 5 safety. If you're talking about top safety in the NFL, like I said, you need to talk about an interchangeable safety. And me and Randy talked about this. You talk about guys like Tyrann Mathieu, right? Guys like Buda Baker, Justin Simmons. I mean, guys who can be the last line of defense. If you're talking about free safety who can just has the deep range to cover, you can look at guys like Jesse Bates from the Cincinnati Bengals. He's one of the most underrated players in coverage when it comes to the free safety position. He is actually if he wasn't in the Pro Bowl, he should have been in the Pro Bowl, but definitely second in line as a second team, first team All Pro when you talk about strictly playing a free safety position. I just like what he brought to the table, along with Mika Fitzpatrick from the Pittsburgh Steelers. All right. So that's pretty much it. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up this live stream. I hope you liked what we had to say. If you did, please hit the subscribe button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen as you stay up to date on all things Beast in real time. Obviously, turn on the bell notification so you get notified when we go live or when we upload content like this. Also, keep in touch on the community page in between posts so you guys know what's coming up next as far as our live streams or any polls or any giveaways that we are running. We are running notification/giveaways. So be sure to turn on the notifications. Otherwise, you won't get notified of those giveaways. Make sense? Makes sense. All right. Thank you so much. And I'll be hopping back at 5:30 p.m. with the Colts podcast. That is also up on the community page. And tomorrow at the same time, 10:30 a.m., we have another hot guest. They keep coming in hot with NFL Network back on the show. Omar Ruiz from NFL Network. He'll be on the show. He's a good guy. Obviously, he's from San Diego State University, just like myself. We're going to talk about San Diego State. We're going to talk about some of the hot topics surrounding maybe even Carl Nassib, maybe even what's going on in today's NFL, like some of his predictions, what he's hearing around the league. We're going to touch on all those topics. So keep it hot here in the BEASTwriter family. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good day. BEASTwriter out.